Oh. Oh, hi. Mr. Pretentious here. I wanted to welcome you. I will be hosting another episode in this series, How You Should Live Your Life According to Me. That's not really the name of the show, but the people here at the cable station, they had this title left over from a show that never made it to there, and they was wanting somebody to use it up and get rid of it. So, actually, the name of this, we like to call this the Neural Revolution. Well, it's not that we actually like to call it that. There's a band of armed thugs over here who are making us call it that. What we were doing last time, if you were here, is I was still talking about the words and calling it a neural revolution, and I think we even considered the possibility we could have called it a kumquat farm or an okra processing plant, which I don't guess sounds as interesting. Is the mic all right? Consider having to do with language, because this is obviously tied to it, or else we're abusing language in a way that I guess could have an ordinary man arrested. But consider what happens in all groups. I was pointing out it's nothing new, but all professions, everything, we keep using terms like the city and the secondary and the primary world, calling us a neural revolution, which I guess the first time you ever heard it, you might think, well, boy, how fascinating or how interesting or how weird, which I guess it does sound better at first blush than an okra processing plant. As far as there being a great inherent distinction or superiority to the latter name, but when it comes to the use of language and words, as I said, it's obvious and it's no discovery on our part. All professions, everything at what we've been calling the secondary level, everything in the city, everything that is special to man, which, if you got good eyesight at all, everything mortal is special to man. Unless we're going to find that indeed we do have beavers now running weight loss classes, or so we have moose running stop smoking clinics. But all the professions, the easy way, right quick, all the professions, everything that seems to be institutionalized, anything that is systemic and put together now as an organization in the city, ends up having its own special jargon. And it is not simply for specific technical reasons, because that's of no great consequence. I think according to you, we bypassed that shortly last time. When we get into non-technical areas, which is the majority of people's ordinary lives, you find always an area of special language. And what happens in the secondary world with the special language, with the words, is that the words are the special language, the terms, etc. They become the raison d'etre of the organization itself, that you end up studying supposedly the ideas of the organization. They could be everything from a university, what they're teaching in a particular class, to the obvious easy one of religions. That what they're teaching, what you think you're studying, you end up studying the language, studying the words. It is for that reason that you don't find any new ground ever broken neurally. For instance, the schools, and it's not, of course, the fault of the institution, it's not the fault of the schools, but what they're ending up doing is continuing to replay Mozart and say it's new, and they change the last bar. So that the people come in and say, yes, we're here for something new, and they're still back in playing the game of, I love new music, so long as, you remember, so long as it sounds like that Mozart piece I like. You have it all the way from that to, in the religion, that everyone continues to teach from the Quran, if you're a Muslim. And that's all they have to do. And if you're an outsider, if you were a non-Muslim, to stay with that example, or if you were just non-religious, and you thought, well, I've never been around a church or synagogue or any sort of religious activity, I'll go listen. And you went several times, and you had any sort of ear, and you were just being non-critical, you'd listen, you think, well, Jesus, when are they going to do something different? Especially if you went a lifetime, which people do out here, I don't think about it, that they go week after week after week. And it was easy, so that was a little faux sarcasm for you to get the point that if you had an outsider's view of it, even if you had some interest in what they were doing, this is hard to describe since it couldn't work. It's not hard to describe, I can describe it, but if you listen, you think, no, that never happens. And it's up to you to figure out, how come that never happens? If you can describe it, how come it never happens? I was almost back to being Mr. Pretentious, because that's how you should, Anyway, if you had no interest and you continued, if you had no specific axe to grind with it, and you could take what would amount to an objective view of it, if you went back week after week and you thought, well, something in here intrigues me, and you kept going back to the temple or the church or whatever, they run through whatever they're using, the Quran, the Bible, the Old Testament. If it was Buddhism, running through, his baskets. I don't think that the language from which that originated would particularly care for that word if they knew how it was going to translate into English. For those of you in the psychiatric trade that think about basket cases, or even you bakers, I guess. But if you continued to go and if you kept thinking, well, they're about to get on the verge of something, because the premise of all religion, for instance, and education, it's just a variation, but of religion is the secret of life. And you think, hey, I can dig that. Once a week, I'll show up. Plus, they don't force you to pay when you come in. You just show up, and then they kind of, cajole you. But you might continue to show up. But if you went a lifetime, a long time, you find out it's the same thing over and over and over. And if you tried to, again, non-critically, and if they would play along, which is all impossible, and you went to a rabbi or a priest or a minister and you said, I like the idea that what you're up to, you call it religion, that you are teaching the secret of life. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe I slept. I've been coming here now for 10 years. I don't know whether I slept through it or whether I missed something, but, did you give the secret and I wasn't here that week? And of course, their real attitude is, well, sir, week by week, as the Spirit moves us, and then of course, then they would begin to hold up their vade mecum, as we have, something external. We have this knowledge here. We have the words of the gods, that each week we are, in fact, revealing the truth. And the man would think, I'm still playing his part. He would think, well, I still miss something. Because all I hear is the same crap over and over and over. Maybe it's all right, but it's the same thing over and over. They have been through this book. They have been through this pile of literature. After 10 years, they're on it what? The 10th time? How much different can they say about this? It's over and over and over. But see, if there was such a person, which there wouldn't be, because such a person understand that, wouldn't waste time talking to somebody about it. Especially those involved. I'm just playing both parts to try to make it seem external to a man's mind. It would shortly go from that, if you were following this, to the man making an observation and being critical. That you just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. But rather than that being critical, that is part of the stability. That is part of man being made to hunger for steaks, but once they're in line, they say, give me one of those franks. Give me a hamburger patty. And it keeps the line moving through the cafeteria, notwithstanding that crowd that showed up outside with those strange ideas. But it's people who show up originally. They're made to, through churches, this may get too subtle, but it's the same thing intellectually that you're doing in education. That you show up and say, well, I would like to take a course in philosophy. I'd like to study economics. At least I'd like to take a few undergraduate courses, or you may already be decided that, by God, what I want to do is major in economics, which I'm sure that none of us want to consider that any more than people that have gone to church for a lifetime. But It is the same thing because you end up that each one has its own language. A particular course or particular academic discipline has its own language. And of course they can defend why. They say, well, there are things we talk about that you do not run across in your ordinary dealings, and therefore we have to have special terminology to describe it. Hey, we all understand that. Here we are calling it an okra farm. And somebody says, well, I don't understand that. And you say, well, that's not, we just had to come up with a new term because this is so specialized that we had to call it something new. So they could describe that is why we have the special language. And at first blush, you might think that's fine. But what is not noticed, that I was trying to get you to notice, that then it becomes its own reason for existence, that you end up, and no one notices this. They're not supposed to, of course. There's nothing amiss. But you end up studying, for instance, let's go back to Christianity. Which is easier to comprehend, religion or economics? I'm asking you rhetorically. Somebody studies, let's say, Christianity. Not just goals, but they say, it's my life. It's very important to me, and I study it. What are they studying? They're studying the language of Christianity. What are they studying? If they study economics, which, along with Wagner and Weatherman, I know that some of you think that we have kicked them around, figuratively speaking. But no. And you can say, well, Weathermen don't know anything. You can say that economists, they get these people on here, they're putting on a suit and a tie, and they go on TV, and they say, well, here is Dr. So-and-so from the university. What do you make of the figures from the last quarter? He says, well, I'll tell you exactly where things are going. And we've been through this enough. If you've got just any sort of short-term memory, any sort of intelligence, any sort of non-hostile ability to think, you know his prediction is worth a foul odor from a cow in the wind. Well, let's be charitable. They're fairly unreliable. Again, why does no one notice it? Why does no one notice that those who supposedly or apparently teach religion, why do they not notice what the claim is? Like economists claim, our job is to predict in general. Of course, part of it is to explain what's going on, which is, if you notice, is the same thing with weathermen. They spend, if they got 5 minutes in their segment of the show, they spend 4.5 minutes telling just what happened. They love that part, if you notice, the weathermen, just being decent, honorable, intelligent people. When it says, well, now before we get to the weekend forecast, let me tell you what's been going on for the last 24 hours. And they can, and they get pointers, and they can strut, and they can smile, and, engage in witty batter with the other people over there, because all they're doing is telling you what happened. They got, the damn things, the computer-driven things, and the photographs, and they're showing the clouds moving, and they just smile, and they say, this is what happened, because they're on safe ground. They told you what happened yesterday. But then it gets down to that critical last, 30 seconds, and you see them begin to sweat and tremble, and they start, and here's the weekend forecast, and everything. There's no more chit-chat going on from the anchor people over there. It's like they don't want any part of it because they know. And I notice they flash graphics, and they quit shorting the weatherman said. They should, break down of all the calendars and little suns and symbols about what's going to be raining and this and that. And it's like the weatherman wants to get out there because he knows. Assuming he's still got any sanity being a weatherman, he knows that his prediction tomorrow, his and the government, their prediction's worth the same thing as an economist saying, well, yes, I have 4 degrees, and I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. He could have 4 degrees or 32 degrees, but they're both going to freeze. They don't know what's going to happen. So back to what I was trying to get you to consider for a reason, and we're not proving that we're smarter than they are, because we're not. If we're smarter than they was, what the hell do I know? Why would I know what happens? Think about it. How do I know what goes on with TV weatherman? Put it that way. But the question would be that you would think, well, at least intellectually, strictly intellectually, how can this survive? Not just weatherman on TV, which is only a 30 or 40-year-old phenomenon, but how has religion survived? How has philosophy survived? And if you get good, of course, then you say, how has the intellectual world of man survived? Because they keep saying, their mind keeps saying, all right, follow me. generals, philosophers, religious teachers, they say, get in line and follow me in this cafeteria, by God. Do we want steak? And they'll holler, yes. They go inside and the guy says, oh, I don't know. Give me one of those Franks, the one that's all dried up. Is that cheaper? Give me that one for my friends too. And everybody eats a damn dried up Frank and nobody goes, I came in here wanting to find out the secret of life. I came in here wanting to know what's going to happen with the markets, the wine markets next year. I came in here and what'd I get? A dried up Frank that somebody left over. How come no one notices it? And the reason is you did not go in to eat. You did not go in to find out the secret of life. You did not go in to learn anything other than the language of whatever the institution or the cafeteria or the religion seems to be. The idea of everything having its own language, and the reason I'm laying on this, I guess some of you already see, it gets so subtle because it's a blank wall. It's right in front of you. And it's been pointed out thousands of years ago, casually. You know, the would-be Socratic smartasses pointed out, but as long as you've got a kind of attitude toward it, as long as you point it out and you go, hey, then people can look and not see it. Because as long as you're criticizing, as long as you're taking sides, then anybody can listen and go, well, and then they're left with the great dichotomy, the great polarization of, well, that could be, or they can say, well, he's nuts, or that's just wrong. But if you just point, and it's a blank wall, just right in front of your damn face, and you just point, people are inclined to go, so? And that's it. And they, well, what's the point? Well, you mean you don't like it? You don't like a blank wall? You want me to paint something on it? You want me to not like it? It doesn't work. At any rate, people do not notice because the language, the special language of the organization, of the system, of the institution, becomes the purpose of the institution. Literally. And when you end up studying, as they would call it, and again, we're not being critical because that's all they can call it. But when you go to study Islam, Hinduism, psychiatry, economics, you don't go to study a thing, you go to study the language. And the real subtle part is, all institutions represent the non-existent. So what else are they going to talk about other than themselves? And themselves amount to what? Harvard's not the buildings. There's no such thing as Harvard. The Catholic Church is not the fine churches, as beautiful as they are. They are representing all institutions. Now, again, I'm just using easy ones, despite religions and universities. They represent the non-existent, which I guess to say that that's subtle and a blank wall is, again, somewhat verbally egregious. But there is no such thing, physically, materially, that education, religion, and then right past that, all the secondary world. They represent nothing except themselves. And once you see that, then any idea of there being criticism at all in order regarding what they say and what they do makes moot look impertinent. Because the whole purpose is to talk about themselves. And if you keep saying, well, you know, how about get to it? What's the secret of life? Or what's the secret of economics? I don't think you've read my latest book. I don't think you've been listening, sir. How long have you been coming here to this church? 10 years? Well, we talk about it all the time. I don't know why you haven't heard it. You didn't hear it when we talked about the second book of James or Gunther or whoever they talk about. Especially chapter 17. Yeah, I heard it. You know, you do it once a year. And you didn't hear it? I just said I heard it. Well? And the guy said, well, what was the point? And they think, well, we have someone here who's a non-believer. I mean, your mind is demon-possessed. Because the point is, we're studying this. I've been talking about it. Yeah, I heard you. But what's the secret? and they just draw a blank, if a conversation went that far. All human institutions. May I invite you one more time, if you can take it further, you can go past churches, colleges, or anything. It's the total secondary world of man. Everything that is singular to man, everything in any way above the level of beavers building dams and mooses rutting and wolves taking leaks on your private property. Anything beyond that is the secondary world. And anything beyond that is self-fueling. It represents the interest of only one thing. Or two things if you want to look at it this way. It represents the interest of the non-existent, and it represents itself. And why those kind of conversations, if you followed it all, the one I just did over there about a minute ago, if you were trying to talk to a church, if you're trying to talk to the secondary world in any of its manifestations, and you say, what's the point of a stop smoking clinic? Well, it's to stop smoking. And where does it go from there? What's the purpose of an Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, it's to stop you, it's to help stop you from drinking. What is the purpose of psychiatry? The psychiatrists say, to help those who have problems with their mind. Of course, then they say feelings and all that other stuff, but their mind. And you say, well, tell me, how do you help? Well, you must not have read my book. Well, no, I haven't. Well, here's some brochures. Go read them first. And if you say you have read the book, then they say, well, what questions do you have specifically? And I say, well, I want to know what's the purpose of psychiatry. Well, I'm sorry, young man, you're going to have to be more specific. You can't just say, what's the purpose of psychiatry? You have read my book. Yes, I did. Read it twice. Well, then specifically, what is it you would like to talk about? See, even you're sitting there waiting. That's it. That was the point. Or you ask a man, what's the secret of life? Well, we trust our whole approach is based here on the sacred, revealed, remembered sayings and writings, he didn't write, of Buddha, or the Holy Bible, the Word of God. Well, what I want to know is, I've always been a decent sort, and yet I'm not rich and famous. Why? Well, have you read the book? Have you read the Bible? Well, yes, I did. After you recommended, I read it through. Did you happen to read about... does the name Job ring a bell to you? Yeah, I remember that story. Well, and the guy goes, well? And the people say, well? You must not have read it correctly. The guy said, well, I don't know how. I read it in the, with both eyes, and I understood all the words. Well, you might didn't read it correctly. Again, it's based on the same thing we're talking about. You do understand, all of you notice, that kind of conversation that I've just done could not take place, because even if verbally it took place out in the ordinary world, by then one or both parties would have been hostile. Whether they're fighting or not, they would have been taking sides, and for instance, the people representing the institution, in this case the church, would be defensive. Like, come on. And of course by then the other guy would have been like, come on, you've been pulling my leg. Because he would say, if it could happen, if there could be someone who was interested and found out it was non-profitable and still not be hostile, which is not possible in the ordinary world, if it did happen, then he would be actually the part I'm playing of saying to the religion, to the institution, whatever it was, that you said the purpose was so-and-so and it didn't work. Or you hadn't told me that. And they can't comprehend that. And they don't represent anything other than the human nervous system. They don't represent some nefarious group of ill-fitting misfits in the intellectual or spiritual or emotional world. They represent everybody, because they would go, what? Because you would be saying, if you were such a person, to have that attitude and not be hostile enough to make this conversation fly in the ordinary world, you'd be saying, well, you said the purpose was so-and-so. You said the purpose of studying economics was to learn something about economics. And they'd say, well, didn't you read the book? If you read the book, what they're saying is, if you don't know something about our language, then how can you expect to know about economics? Which, the part I'm trying to play for you, is that somebody intellectual is thinking that they start off thinking, well, economics, big E, the world, the discipline, the art. There's science, they like to say, of economics, of archaeology, of psychiatry, of medicine. It exists. You just never think about it. You think, well, I'm going to study economics. And you're talking about that I'm going to study a redwood tree. That it's out there, there's something to it, and I can learn about it. There's no economics. And yet, if you were oppressed, a sane man would say, well, if you said, why do you want to study economics? They would say, well, I want to study economics because money, financial affairs is a large part of modern civilized existence. And the better informed a man is about matters financial, the better he can run his life, prepare for the future, prepare for his children's future, live a decent, upright life. Yeah. So I'd like to study economics. But if you go study economics, all you're going to study is the language of economics. What else is there? And you think, well, if you're ordinary, you think, wait a minute, no, you're playing with words. You see? And then people don't hear that, like, well, like they keep waiting for more. There ain't no more. Don't say, I'm playing with words. They're the ones that started it. They say, we're teaching economics. We're teaching the secret of life. Don't accuse me that, wait a minute, you're trying to make them look silly by playing with words. Well, hey, who taught me? How about that? Everything in the secondary world, all the institutions, the idea of secret language, and even if they don't have the idea, it turns out that way. It turns into the ultimate self-fueling system, the ultimate self-fueling machinery, because there is nothing to it other than what it represents, which is what? Words. The reason it's easy, from even a crude view, to attack all forms of human institutions, of religions, the reason it's easy to attack them is there's no one home. And the reason that they are so passionately defended is that which does not exist, or the less something is meaningful, the less it exists, the more passionately it must be defended. Which is what the great example that some of you brought up last week. That a nice front-end loader in a bar in Montana will turn around and look at a roofer that wandered into the wrong bar, that looks at him funny, and pop him one. And it's over. But if you start fighting, we'll assume he stepped on his toe, touched his beer. Something real and meaningful. And it's over. But if you get into religious warfare, nationalistic disputes, they go on for what? They go on to the point of driving you nuts. Who wants to hear about, if I hear about Bosnia Herzegovina, a guy said, not me, I'm going to tear my TV set out of the wall. Jesus. How about some new news? Some what? Oh, okay. If I hear more about the conflicts in Northern Ireland, I'll go crazy. Why don't those people straighten up? What kind of nuts have we got over there? The closer it is to being non-existent, the more passionately it will be fought over. It's not insanity, it's not stupidity, and once you begin to see it, it is a man and his math. It is the electrochemical energies that run a 3D universe, that it can't be otherwise. Because the closer it is to being, and I say real, not in some metaphysical sense, but the closer it is to the primary world, that is, the guy walks in or walks past you on the street and bumps into you, and you turn around and pop him. The fight has started, and it's over within a matter of 5 seconds. And both people leave. That's the end of it. Because it was real, that is in the primary sense. That dumb son of a bitch, that smart ass, bumped right, he saw you. Or whatever it was. He just stepped on your foot, and you were the sort, having majored in English Lit. Once he stepped on your foot, you floored him. But if you're walking down the street and a man stops you and he says, I don't know about you, sir, but to me, the existentialist are nuts. I wouldn't give you a dime for the intelligence of every existentialist, especially the French ones that ever lived. And you might begin to think, does he see something funny in the curvature of my nose? Is he accusing me of being a philosophical frog? And if this stirred up any sort of animosity, even approaching physical fisticuffs, as opposed to one guy flooring another one, popping him, who stepped on his foot, and it was all over in 5 seconds, you could come back to these two dudes 10 years later, and they could still be standing there on the street kind of pacing each other, full of threats. Over what? Well, did you hear what he said? Need we drag it out? You could, from another view, make this sound as though it were an exact byplay of kids out on a playground. Well, he called me a so-and-so, and the teacher says, come on. Did he hit you? No, but he called me a such and such. Oh, calm down. No, I'm not going to calm down. The reason for all of that, still in the same general subject, is look how easy it is to make an apparently sophisticated, educated critique of the stupidity, the inane approach of men in the levels that seem to be the singular areas of man, such as religion, politics. Not fighting over property, not fighting over the actual territory one country to another, but fighting over the goddamn theory of a people saying what we should do. We believe in the alternate form of democracy. And the people across the line here, they say, what the hell is that? We believe one vote for every other person. And the people over here, being the modern, free-thinking, democratically driven people they are, they huddle amongst themselves and said, did you hear that? And you know by then, all they got to do is huddle. Get 2 or more people huddling across your border, across in somebody else's backyard, and you're on the verge of being attacked. But on what? The other people didn't step over on their property. No, they didn't do that. We'll admit that. But those people are dangerous. They are nuts. They're talking about one vote for every other person. Now, we come from the Chicago school. As many votes for each person as they can go cast. Or something. There is an intensity that, again, I'd like to point out for a second. It's not for me to give credit to history many times when I say this has been noticed 5,000 years ago. I was about to say, anything that sounds new that I could bring up, there's always a crude. I can always find it, an absolute reflection of the same thing going on in life, but looked at in a slightly, shall we say, different way. I already said crude. It has been pointed out for years and years and years and years by just all sorts of ordinary people. And since history remember it, you can be sure that they were ordinary. Of saying that there was some peculiar stupidity, a kind of odious aroma that exemplified extreme stupidity having to do with religious wars. That's been the obvious one, that historically there have been philosophers saying there is something strange when men begin to fight over philosophy or religion, that is, anything other than fighting over property, women, wealth, ore in the ground. When they start fighting over theories and philosophies, there is some kind of strange insanity. They won't just defeat one another. They'll defeat one another, then chop up the defeated into little bitty pieces, put them through a meat grinder, throw them down, scrape it like that, then take what's left, the dust, and then we'll go up in an airplane and throw it out to the wind and spit after it. And it just goes on. You know, that people's notice, even ordinary people, that something is going on. But they normally attribute it to, because the people that do this, if you want to follow this real good, are normally non-religious historically, and they always pick on religion, the religious wars, and then they pick on the basis that anybody that's religious is nuts to start with. And so they say, well, it just proves the insanity of those who are religious, because once they start fighting, they're not even like us decent people, us philosophers. If we got in an argument over a chess game or something, I wouldn't hit my friend. Well, I might kick him in the shins or something. I might slap his silly face, but, I'd slap him, and that'd be the end of it. But these people, they start fighting over, something silly like religion, and it takes on a certain kind of unique insanity. I mean, there's a ferocity to it that it just belies any sense of reason. But notice, they always blame it on what's going on, such as the religious are nuts. They're irrational to start with. I hate to take credit. I've told you the truth. The less something is real, and I was being sort of verbally magnanimous with that, but the less real, the less meaningful something is. That is, the more you could attribute its existence to the secondary world, the more you could isolate and say this is getting very close to strictly a human phenomenon. There's nothing parallel, there's nothing even resembling it in what I perceive to be the primary world, if you've been taking our kind of inside secret descriptions and terms. That I see this as being unique to man. If it is, then you're back to what I'm trying to get you a certain view of it. That the less real it is, in fact, the less physically, materially it exists, the more ferocious it will be defended. And it doesn't have to do. It's not because that people who are religious in religious wars are insane. No. There's a slight twist that some of you could probably put together yourself. The intellectuals, as they would call themselves, and I'm not disputing it, in the ordinary world, they do not seem to stage those kind of physical wars between one another that the religious have done. But they do it in their own way. And it is as long-running, it is as bloodthirsty in a non-literal sense as would be between the Jews and the Arabs in Lebanon or the Christians and the Arabs in Lebanon. It is just on a non-physical level. But the ferocity is there. In a sense, the insanity is there. Of fighting over economic theories, political paradigms, philosophies, for the same reason. That the closer you are to something being non-existent, that what you represent. I'm part of the Irish Republican Army, which may not be the best one to use, but I assume you follow. I'm part of the Islamic Home Defense Front of Northeast Beirut. As soon as you hear that, if you don't know anything about the conflict, if you had your choice of being in a dark alley with this guy, or another guy says, I'm a roofer from Alabama, and I'm broke, and I got a knife on me, and I need some money quick. And if you got your choice that you got to go down a dark alleyway, let's say that's maybe 100 yards long. You're going down with the guy who's a defense guard for the Islamic, neighborhood guard of Northeast Beirut, or this roofer with a roofing knife, and a bad thirst and no money. Who would you go down with? I assume that you people understand which one you'd have a better chance with. Because at least the roofer, he'll cut you and take your money and leave you. The other guy going to stay here and stomp on you right up to the edge of death and then try and keep you from dying, pull you back, so he can talk to you about it. And then when you seem to revive, stomp you some more and then slap you around and won't talk to you. Where I was trying to point for a second was there is a self-fueling efficiency to all secondary systems that's just beautiful. But it's the same basis on which people ordinarily attack the kind of persistence, such as the wars, such as the interreligious, the interdenominational, the internationalistic, the interracial conflicts between people. And they attack that as some form, obvious proof of the insanity of man, as a obvious shortcoming to the progress of man, which from that view, they're correct. Once you see it, you understand exactly what they're saying. They got no other choice because from that view, it is nuts. But I could also point out that in the secondary world, it is a world of conflicts. But without the conflicts, there would be no world. it would all stop. When you've got a system that's not sending out reports of anything new, you've got a system that's dying. And what the new reports normally are from systems on the surface appear to be bad news. But it's always new bad news. If you quit hearing about Bosnia-Herzegovina, if you don't hear anything about it, there's only two choices. Things calmed down or things died. But as long as you say, well, Jesus, it's more bad news. Now they have even pushed the decent folks. Now they've taken everything that the Muslims owned in that area. They've not only taken everything they had, but now they have sold it. Now they told them never come back. Whatever it is that you think, well, it's the same bad news. Nah, it's always some new bad news. As long as the area is alive. That is, as long as energy is still being transformed and transferred one person to another. But back from I was going to say the ordinary view of critics, which is part of moving the energy around, they continue to point out that people are insane, that they're fighting over that which should not be fought over, such as religion. Again, the obvious one that, boy, if there's anything you should not be fighting over, it's religion. Supposedly the banner of man's civility. And then for them to slip so low, to become so partially disoriented, thank you, Jesus, or, be clouded by the evil, heavy hand of Satan, or whatever it is. What came over these people? They're temporarily fighting one another. What do you mean temporarily fighting one another? As soon as Adam said, well, I think I'll be a Presbyterian, and his brother, whoever it was, says, we can't, we're Jewish. And Adam says, maybe you are, but I'm not, I converted. And you say, well, they've been fighting now a long time. Yeah, that long. That's a long time, yes, because what the ordinary mind conceives of as being a base of conflict, a proof of insanity, is no such thing. It's just somebody, let's say, who is a Lubinite, someone who is anti-internal combustion engine, and they live next door to you, and every time you crank up the car, they think, God Almighty, I can't stand that noise. And you, being the lover you are of fine machinery, you hear the hum, a purr, damn near close to a 6-foot-headed or 6-foot-tall blonde-headed woman built like this, moaning. Next to that, to you, is to hear that Ferrari cranked up and go, It's like, talk to me. And the guy next door thinks, I'm going nuts. Satan has moved this man next to me to create these ungodly noises. That is what the ordinary mind hears in the conflicts in life. And it's not the special conflicts, notice. Not the special conflicts down at the physical level. Men will tolerate that. Notice they report on the news. But men do not have the same attitude if you hear on the news. And one time would not necessarily prove it, but look at your own self, and you can feel it in the rest of the nervous system of life. Over a long period, like your lifetime, you hear about those kinds of closer to the roofer, cutting somebody to get money, those kind of very physical, direct, one-on-one assaults, murders. They report, today in our city, whatever city it is, and they start, and it takes them 2 or 3 minutes, they report all of the inter-family murders, which most of them are, or friend murders. Friend on friend. Oh, yeah. They used that for a while, and I noticed that some of the people making the reports began to go. And I think they changed it to acquaintance on acquaintance. Like, well, they can't be friends. Of course, when they interview somebody, this is an acquaintance on acquaintance murder. How long have they been acquaintances? Oh, 30 years. At any rate, do you notice, you can feel it in yourself, there is not that same feeling if you just ordinary and kept up with the news, to find out that in your locale, or in your city, your village, that every day, and they report it in some short detail, but you find that every day the kind of things of people killing each other over women, killing each other for God knows why, they bumped into one another, killing somebody over they do know why, that a guy said, give me all your money, and he got his money and then he shot him. As bad as that sounds, men, reasonable, civilized, men do not have the same attitude in their nervous system. They do not have their same attitude, the same kind of condemnation. And it's not moral, it's not taught, it's not religious, but you do not have the same kind of attitude toward murder, toward ill will, toward physical conflict, when it's down close to the primary level, as you do when it's higher, when it's further away from the primary level. That is, you will abide. Society will abide. The institution will abide an increasing number, a sizable number of very direct, physical, primary level murders, which is a form of warfare. It's over real quick, and it's just 2 people instead of thousands. But they'll tolerate that you find out that 10 cabbies a night are being killed in our city, and as long as you don't find out that all 10 cabbies were Jewish and running from the cabs all 10 times seemed to be somebody wearing a sheet, or all 10 cabbies were Republicans, and 9 of the instances, witnesses says the people who ran away seemed to be dressed as donkeys. As long as all 10 cabbies were free market economists, and reports are by eyewitnesses that a majority of the assailants, they would be the probable assailants who left, seemed to be men. Just their accountants seemed to say that they probably favored a controlled economy. That'd be a different story. But if it says 10 cabbies per night are being murdered in our city and robbed, you could, if you got nothing else to do, you might go, my, and that's about it. And not just you. The institutions, the city itself, will tolerate. They can absorb that kind of physical, primary level body blow in a way that they will not, if they did find out, is why you were laughing, if they find out these cabbies, their money's not being taken, and it does appear to be some kind of philosophical murders taking place, or politically based murders against cab drivers, you're going to see a different story. Society will not accept it. And by society, of course, we're talking about the secondary world. That is, it will protect itself. Is that great philosopher, who was it? I won't give him credit again. The secondary world's got to protect its phony baloney job. Man, we got to pull ourselves together. We'll be out of work. If we keep letting ourselves kill each other for secondary reasons, that's suicide. Killing ourselves for primary reasons, that's like the flu. It's a virus. It's nothing new. That can be controlled. Society controls itself. That is, life controls itself. But what strikes me as being very alarming, for those of you that, I'm just going to start letting the Hollywood Bowl talk to me, that in tricycles, the youngest wheel causes a certain deal of concern, because the older ones find that what he's doing is always playing a real dangerous game of catch-up. Always. It's very alarming. That's what the secondary world would see if when secondary conflict and hostility gets past a certain point, things are moving too fast. From ordinary views, it seems like they're going downhill. But it's moving too fast. Because going downhill would be if the physical murders, the primary-based conflicts get out of hand. Then life will do something. But it doesn't disturb people. Again, I know what you'll say. My, it's disturbing. But notice, society, that is, the secondary world, does not undergo great upheavals. Just look at history if you can't feel it contemporaneously. That does not happen over simple, physical, material, or as we've been calling it, primary conflicts and disputes. I mean, sure, there are upheavals, but damn, they're short-lived. The Napoleons can only strut so long, and somebody's going to cut them down. But not when it gets to you. Look how long Christianity, look how long Judaism, look how long democratic principles, look how long the great ideal of tyranny, as long as I'm the tyranny. Look how long that survived. That is, the conflicts. They cannot be settled. Because if they were settled, it'd be suicidal. I was going to get you also to consider that is the ultimate self-fueling machinery, is the secondary world, and within it, another form of ultimate self-fueling systems are all human institutions, because they exist only for themselves. They are the ant structures temporarily made by the army ants to protect the queen, to protect themselves, and it's constructed of what? Themselves. That's all human institutions. That if you tried to attack this kind of ant structure, and you think, well, I'll separate the ants, I got nothing against the ants, it's just I don't like ant philosophy. Let's say that you're a bunch of wasps, I guess. And don't everybody put together your own joke out of the acronym of WASP. You're a bunch of woodpeckers then. No, wait a minute. Now I'll have them roofers from Alabama. Not peckerwoods, woodpeckers. But if you came in on the ants and says, all right, we got nothing against the ants personally. I mean, it's not that the ants have been taking our women, especially ants with, I don't think they'd present any great, fill in your own joke. They say it is the ant philosophy. But how can you attack the ant structure? You ask the woodpecker or the wasp. And the truth is, he can't. Because the ant structure, the secondary world of the ants, the structure in this case that makes the ants unique and protects them is what? It is them. That is the secondary world. That which it protects is itself. And you say, well, wait a minute, let me get inside the structure of the ants. Let me get inside the structure of religion. Let me get inside the structure of education and see what's there. Oh my God. That was a little dramatic. If I had a curtain, it's what's in there. Since we're mostly speaking in English here, for those of you that wondered out there, what I'm suggesting would be in there starts with an N. And even those of you that speak Spanish, may I suggest, it still starts with an N. The secondary world is itself. All institutions are themselves. All special terminology that everyone must use. The teachings of every system, the teachings of all the institutions, the theories, the models, the paradigms, that which they seem to represent, are what? Well, they're two things. They're that which they represent, and they are them. That if you look inside, and you could see, that is, you could look inside and not be upset. That is, if you could look inside and be a revolutionist. That is, if you could be a revolutionist and then look inside. You can take some selection from that column. If you did that and you looked inside, then you'd go, if you went anyway, you'd go, aha. I mean, being the understated, laid-back kind of guys and gals I know you are, you go, aha. Well, as opposed to going, oh my God, and fall down and have a coronary. You could look at the secondary world as being not only the world's greatest example of self-defense, since that's all it's defending. You could also look at it as being the extremely efficient, the exemplary prototype of a self-fueling mechanism or piece of machinery. But then you would have to look also, if you could see that, at what is known as an individual man's finger. No, personality. Personality. Then you would be left with what we've been also talking about, the great world of self-reference. Not an attack on the vanity of man and men talking about themselves, but what else are they going to talk about? Now, if we spent 55 minutes for no reason, if you understand that all human institutions, everything great from Harvard to Cambridge to the Catholic Church, to all churches, to great political systems, theories, ideals, that the only thing they have to talk about, the only thing they are, is what they talk about. That there is no such thing as Harvard. There is no such thing, and not just specific, there is no such thing as a university. Yes, there is as a building. Why do you go pay? And nowadays, if you're civilized, I guess you could spend more money on your children in college than you ever pay to a damn church. Are they still after 10%? But at any rate, you say, yes, it is. Harvard is something. Universities are something, and then point specifically to an Oxford and say, there it is. And you know it's not. You know it's not. All you got to do is think. You don't go pay $10,000 for what? Well, I'll take the science building. That's what I want for my $10,000. Or I want the chemistry lab. You don't get anything. You don't even get your books. You got to buy them extra. What? What are you buying, really? What do you leave there and you spent? Your first quarter, they say that'll be $8,942. You pay it, and then you wait. And they look at you the same way a priest would, that you expected some kind of, help. Or a rabbi, well, you're going to tell me something. You wait, you pay them nearly $9,000, they hand you a receipt. And you wait some more, and finally they're going to either call a security guard. Somebody's going to say, what the hell do you want? And you say, well, $9,000, I'd like something. And I know you'll finally say, well, what I'm getting is an education. What I'm getting is somewhat intangible. Somewhat intangible. You rascal of an understatement. So you've been giving 10% or $20 or $50 a week to your temple or to your church, and you've been doing this for 30 years. What do you have for it? What do I have for it? Well, I guess then they go into peace of mind. I have a certain kind of assurance. Quotation mark. What do you have? Quite literally, you have nothing. What did you buy? It's not the same as going in and say, well, no matter what a bargain or no matter how overcharged it may seem, at least if you say, okay, I will take that dried up frank if that's the one you got left. Even if you thought you were overcharged, at least when you leave, you got something. When you get to the end of the line, you pay the cashier your $1. At least you got that. But when you get in the secondary world, what are you buying? And don't worry about getting cheated. It's not that anybody's going to cheat you. Look out the other way. What can you buy? What can they sell? Look out the other way. You open up the Fred Schwartz School of Information. And maybe you even dicker. At least you undercut Oxford. You don't charge $9,000 to talk to somebody. And people come up and say, well, I'd like to know some information. You say, well, lay a 10 on me. What are you going to sell? What are you going to sell? And of course you can say, well, I'm going to sell my experience. I'm going to sell my expertise. Yeah. Is that anything like a dried up frank? No, it's nothing like that. Well, don't bet on it. But at any rate, what are you selling? The point is, you got nothing. I got me. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're back to self-reference. Now we're back to, where I know you tried to get us started 55 minutes ago. We're back to the self-fueling machinery. Why is it that to stay alive, an institution can only talk about itself? Why does it get to that? Where else can it go? Why, if you're going to study a religion, why do you end up studying the language of the religion? What else are you going to study? What else they got? If you're going to study economics, I want to know some information. Are you nuts? What you want to do is study the language of economics. It is the ultimate external example of a self-fueling system and machinery, but man is then the individual exemplary model of that. And that's what all self-reference is. And the less there is of something, remember, the more it must be passionately defended, and the less there is of something, the more it must be talked about. Au revoir.